Welcome to another CEO Wisdom podcast. We have Nikki Sanger with us today. Nikki is the founder and CEO of MEC Disabilities. It's all about inclusive business development for her. It's the Sensory Space by MEC Disabilities. She's a keynote speaker, disability advocate, and a special needs director in Oregon. I'm in Oaxaca, Mexico. This podcast is brought to you by podper.com. If you want to get leads with podcasting, we have a system that can help you do that and close 10% into actual clients for you. We also use podcasts for AdSense dollars and insights and meeting cool people all together. So if you want a framework, if you want a roadmap to create your own podcast, you can go to podper.com. Nikki, welcome to the podcast. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I'm the founder and CEO of MEC Disabilities and Inclusive Business Development. I started MEC Disabilities in 2021, and that was because of my daughter having cerebral palsy, and the insurance side of everything for adaptive equipment was just taking forever. And so I was just hearing from people all across the US that it was just kind of a thing that was just being seen over and over again. So I decided to do something about it. And so we started just getting people with disabilities 21 years and younger adaptive equipment that was denied by insurance. And now we expanded to insurance advocacy, IEP advocacy, and we just help like across the board with people with disabilities. And then last year, we expanded into helping schools and businesses become more inclusive. I specialize in inclusion and ADA compliancy. So I go around to different businesses and different schools and make sure that they're up to date on all the latest ADA compliancies and laws, just to make sure that they're up to date on their state and local standards. So I just kind of go based off of that. And we just kind of work with MEC Disabilities and Inclusive Business Development together. And so when we sign on a client for Inclusive Business Development, we help a school for free. So we give back that way, and it goes through MEC Disabilities for that. So then we can kind of incorporate everything together.
And how was your journey with your daughter that suffers from disability? How did you first learn, and how did you had to adapt yourself as a human when you knew that you had a daughter that would suffer from disabilities?
So at first, I wasn't we weren't really sure. I had a really hard pregnancy at the end. Everything was totally fine up until I hit about 28 weeks, and then I had to have her early at 34. She was in NICU while I was still a patient in the hospital. So there was kind of that separation with us. So there was a lot of that disconnect. And then I still had to be a patient and take care of her and go back and forth between our rooms. So it was kind of a long period. So her being premature, she was obviously a lot smaller. But other than that, she got off of oxygen. She got off of her feeding tube quite early, and she got to go home after a few weeks. And so, after, I want to say she was almost a year old, I noticed she was kind of sitting differently. And I took a picture, and I was a sports massage therapist before. And I was like, okay, this just doesn't look right. And so I showed her pediatrician, and I was like, okay, something needs to be done about this. And so we had her diagnosed, and she was misdiagnosed at Shriners. And I was like, okay, it's not this, from a medical standpoint, it just isn't correct. They misdiagnosed her as having hip dysplasia, and they said she'll walk one day, not a big deal. And I was like, just reading different medical journals, I was like, this isn't right. It's not, it just doesn't seem right. So I had to advocate really hard to even get her a second opinion. And then we went to Dornbecker's up in Portland, and then they diagnosed her correctly as cerebral palsy. But that, took almost an 8-month window to where she could have been getting therapies, and she could have been kind of moving along ahead a lot faster. And then I guess like COVID hit, and then she regressed a lot after that. And yeah, just, you know, everything on top of everything. But she's just my inspiration for kind of just helping families all over. So.
And tell us a bit more about cerebral palsy for those that don't know what it is specifically.
So cerebral palsy is a neurological condition that can happen either in the womb, at birth, or at a very young age. Hers, well, I guess it could also happen genetically. Hers is, we're guessing because they can't really determine what hers is from. But just from me being Rh negative and her being Rh positive, which is just a protein in the blood, her getting jaundice a few days after the birth, we're thinking that it's stemming from that because hers is considered mild. It's just primarily from the waist down that just affects her, so she can't walk or stand independently. She got the SDR, which is selective dorsal rhizotomy, which is an open spinal surgery up in St. Louis by Dr. Park, who recently actually just passed away. But he was like the godfather of the surgery and was like world-renowned surgeon for this. So, but cerebral palsy can be, you know, it could make people wheelchair bound. It could, you know, be very like, you wouldn't even notice in some people. It could just affect, you know, their hand or just one limb or the lower limbs or the upper limbs. It just is kind of varies just depending on the case.
And what kind of cares does that require? What kind of hurdles did you went through that pushed you to shift from massage therapist to having a full business that helps with that?
So once she was diagnosed, because since she was premature, she had to be, her milestones were technically up to par for being premature. But once she was diagnosed as having cerebral palsy, she wasn't able to go into a lot of like daycares or normal schools. So we were like set back on that. And I couldn't work. I couldn't do anything. I had to be her 100% caregiver. And so from then on, I just like advocated and started doing, you know, pretty much what I do now for everyone else. But once you're given a diagnosis, you are like shown the door. You don't really get help. There's a lot of families out there that, you know, they don't know the next steps. And I found out from another parent locally that she like helped me navigate like what to do next. And like, if it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't have been able to get as far ahead as I have with my daughter. So we just kind of helped establish that going forward with a lot of families and just helping with like the resources and support just with lived experiences. And so we just have a community of volunteers, either I guess parents, physical therapists, occupational therapists, doctors, specialists that go on and talk with different families that have asked questions, and they'll help them through the process. So, yeah.
Right. I guess therapy for parents is really important. And that only like resurfacing back then. I think parents didn't really know how to deal with that. But what are the costs to deal with all of that? There's meds, there's the wheelchair, there's physiotherapy. And that can be what, like a couple of hundreds of thousands of dollars on a yearly basis?
Yeah. So so her equipment that kind of like started the whole nonprofit, her walker that she ended up, we waited almost a year for. If we would have paid just out of pocket, it would have been a couple $1,000s. And if I would have known that, we could have gotten it within like a month and a half. And so there's that aspect. And then there's, you know, braces, there's therapy, there's, you know, just different medications. And now we're seeing with Medicare and Medicaid cutbacks, just kind of across the board, there's a lot of wait lists for different therapies. So like locally and in like a lot of rural areas, the wait list can be like 500 plus kids for speech therapy or physical therapy. And so that's what we're seeing right now, is that there's just like a lot of there's a lack of resources, especially for families that just don't have the ability to take their kids to get the right equipment or the right therapies that they need. And there's a lot of nonprofits kind of like popping up, or like people that are coming out to try to help, because it's just kind of like receding everywhere. And it's just something that's just not being dealt with in the right way. So we're seeing it in schools, and I'm like right in the middle now of developing a program and working with a few different people to get it to where children that are in like special education programs are learning independence in a different way. And so that they can, kind of get into the general education population and be able to integrate throughout the day with them. And so they're not having to rely solely on the special education system where they're not getting any education at all, or, the bare minimum. So we kind of just, kind of base off of that, and we just help where we can. But
Right. What does MEC does precisely? So you obviously help families with children's with disabilities, right? But do you negotiate partnerships with these brands? Do you get them discounts? How specifically do you help these families? Give me a case study.
okay, so for example, a lot of insurance companies only provide wheelchairs or adaptive strollers. It's one or the other every 2 to 3 years. And in a lot of cases, they outgrow, like you can change out the padding, you can change out the headrest, you can change out different things like that. And it's just not enough a lot of the times. And so they'll get denied. We do insurance advocacy. So we'll go and call the insurance company. They give us the okay to, advocate for them. And we have our NPI number to do, medical equipment. So if they can't, if they say no, we're like, okay, that's fine. And then through grants and sponsors and donations, we're able to get them their equipment that they need. And we have partnerships through Riften, Lecky, and then different adaptive equipment manufacturers and companies across the world that do this, because a lot of the manufacturers are overseas. And we have, other companies like Cubby Beds, and different organizations that we work with, that we either, we pay the cash price or we get our nonprofit discount with it. And we just get it to the families. And no matter where they're at, we have, volunteers that we either get it delivered to, or we get it delivered to the families. And we work with different children's hospitals, different PT clinics across the US. And so the doctors or the PTs will either hand deliver it to the families. But, we've done insurance advocacy for people in their 40s and 50s as well. So it doesn't just stop at 21, but we can only provide equipment for people up to 21, because that's just kind of like where our guidelines kind of restrict us for right now, until we kind of expand out further. But we do like resource and support for any age.
Right. And then you have this other company called Inclusive Business Development. So this one is more on the U side. It's not a nonprofit. And you teach companies about DI specifically with disabilities, if I understand right?
Yeah. So we do trainings, and we do like pretty much everything. So we do employee wellness, we do DEI trainings, and then we also kind of expand on everything. So I go in and do business consulting and go over kind of all strategies on inclusion. So I'll, assess their ADA compliancy. I'll assess what they use for, different structures in their system, their hiring process, what they do for team building, and then just kind of see like what their team consists of, and if they're lacking in any like support or supportive ways that they can help their team members. Because there's sometimes like we'll go in and we'll sit in on meetings, and we'll like kind of see not some animosity, but we'll kind of feel like there's just like, something there that's just like not, either somebody's not saying something, or it's just, there's just something in the air that's just not being said. So we'll like go and talk to people and just like mingle around, and we'll kind of get to the bottom of it. And then we'll, approach HR and, corporate or executive team or something, kind of the higher ups about it. And we'll just say, this is what we think that you should do about it. Or this person's like feeling like their needs aren't being met, and, or, they have this issue. Is there any way that you can help them in this way? They think that if you gave them this opportunity or this tool, they can do better at their job. So we just kind of work with different tools and different companies. And another company that we work with is AbleNet, which also does like communication devices, different programs, and obviously different tools that you can work with. So.
And the recent DI defunding, do you think it's justified? What's the pros and the cons about what happened in the US in Q1 this year?
I think that it's been blown way out of proportion. Definitely, I would say that the funding was misused, in like lack of better terms. There's a lot of different ways that it could have been like gone about. Like I know we've been hit really hard on how things were awarded in our grants for our nonprofit. And so all of our grants got kicked back. So I'm having to work with the senators that we work with, and they're like assessing like all the grants that got kicked back. And, it's mostly on wording because it either said inclusion or co-ability, or, and we, have a co-ability play space, and we work on inclusion with, kids of different abilities. So when you break it all down and you have to really like work with that, that's, you're not just doing, disabilities, you're doing BIPOC, you're doing LGBTQ, you're just doing everyone. And people aren't really realizing that it's, so for inclusive business development, it's not inclusion based on disabilities, it's inclusion for including everyone and including the whole aspect of a business, not just the, basics. We want to like look into every little detail, because if you don't have the foundation and you don't have, the walls and the structure, everything else is going to fall apart. And if you don't have a good structure and you don't have a good base, then that's where, companies are really lacking. So we want to make sure that, like this is still kind of being pushed forward, and we haven't seen any decrease in our clientele base, which is good. It's, definitely a lot harder to get in the doors with newer companies, especially now that it's kind of like at a forefront. But, there's a lot of states that are pushing against the 504. And they actually brought that up at my daughter's last IEP meeting, that they wanted my daughter to be on a 504 instead of an IEP. And I told them no, because of everything that's happening in the other states right now, pushing back the 504. But yeah, it's just, I don't know, just all across the board. I think that it was just adjusted very rapidly, and it just wasn't kind of like, it's kind of hard to put like into words. It just wasn't done correctly. It was very rapid, and like a lot of people lost their jobs, and a lot of people are very scared. And I know that there's a lot of states that are like, doing away with the programs in the high schools that are for 18 and above, and pretty much pushing the families into putting those children into group homes earlier. And there's a lot of families that I know personally that have had to put their kids into group homes, and they've been assaulted, or there's been things that have happened and they've had to pull them out. And a lot of the times they can't take care of them fully. So it's kind of crazy right now, the times and everything. So everything's just kind of up in the air with it, but hopefully it all settles down, and everyone kind of realizes that there's different paths, and there's different ways to like go about it. I think it was just a very drastic change and a drastic move all at once. And I think that that's why everyone's really up in arms about it, because it's just hard to come back from that, and it's a hard change. But there's always a way for someone to work. There's always a way for someone to make a difference, and there's always a way to stand up and kind of just show that there is a way to include people, and it's not necessarily DEI's fault for certain things, and it's not, it could just be that certain things just weren't put into place correctly. Funding wasn't where it was supposed to be. And that's kind of like the difference on where, like, if your heart's in the right place and you're doing it for all the right reasons, like, it'll be perfect and it'll work out how it's supposed to work out. But, there are the companies that, really use and abuse the system. And that's, kind of what they were looking at. And it was getting used and abused. And that's, where everything else is kind of trickling down from. And they're seeing all these different funding areas getting kind of smashed. And like, I understand from their standpoint for funding. But yeah, it's definitely a very hard subject for a lot of people right now. But I definitely think that it'll kind of expand and start opening back up once everything kind of settles down.
What do you think about the social startup model vs the nonprofit one? Like, would it be nice for clients to have some financial accountability? For example, what if you could fund these wheelchairs over years and charge them, I don't know, like $10 a month or something like that, instead of giving it to them? Have you analyzed both models and their efficiencies?
Yeah, we've kind of looked into that, because right now, being a nonprofit NPI DME provider, we can charge insurance companies the cash price what we get it for, and we charge like a $20 filing fee or whatever that does the paperwork and files it, and that's all we charge. And some insurance companies just reimburse us for the equipment, and it's done. And then we've done it like that, and then there's other times that, like, currently right now we have 186 open applications for adaptive equipment that we aren't able to fulfill right now because we either just don't have the funding, but that's mostly because all the grants got pushed back. So we're just having to reapply. So now it's just a gap in what we're actually trying to see right now. So right now it's just really time and kind of the consideration. But a lot of the times we're looking at, like, these families, they're either relying on a one income household or Social Security, because they're either a single parent taking care of their child full time, or one parent's working and the other parent is taking care of their child, or it's a grandparent taking care of their child. And it's kind of hard for them even to do like $10 to $50 a month. And that's kind of where we're seeing, because we've had an adaptive equipment application for a toddler with a tube. They had a tube feeding, and then a quart, and they have onesies that are made. And these onesies are $30 a piece. Insurance doesn't cover it. And so they were just cutting holes in onesies. And so they applied for a couple of these onesies, and I ended up, working with the company, and I got them 6 onesies in 3 different sizes. So they'd have it, as the child grew. And we paid for 6 of them in one size and got 2 other sizes for free through the company. And so we've just been working with companies like that, and that makes it a lot easier for us, because we're able to provide more for the families, and we're able to help more families in general. So that's kind of, where we're at right now, is that working with those companies, and they're able to do stuff like that. It kind of helps, all across the board. So,
Nikki, thanks for showing up today. Where can people find out more about you?
At mecdisabilities.org. And then for inclusive business development, just ibdtoday.com.
Was Nikki Sanger